In early 1776, the American colonies were bleeding. Militias clashed with British troops at Lexington and Concord, and an armed rebellion was underway. Yet the colonists had no clear ultimate goal. They were locked in a contradiction. They were shooting at the king's soldiers to protest taxes, while simultaneously praying for a peaceful reconciliation with that exact same king. They were trapped by a psychological block. For centuries, Europeans assumed that being ruled by a monarch was a permanent law of nature. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gave it the appearance of being right. In February, a 47-page pamphlet appeared in Philadelphia. Published anonymously, it argued the colonies must break away from the king. Instead of dense academic philosophy, this document was written in everyday English, stripping away aristocratic jargon to speak directly to the public. The author, Thomas Paine, ignored the polite boundaries of political debate. He used plain logic to make the idea of staying loyal to Britain look completely ridiculous. Paine started by dismantling the idea that government is a holy institution. He argued that society and government have entirely different origins. Society is produced by our wants and promotes our happiness. Government is produced by our wickedness and exists negatively to restrain our vices. If government is, at its best, a necessary evil, then the goal isn't to make it grand or complicated. The goal is security. The simplest form of government will always be the most effective, offering the least expense and the greatest benefit to the people. This logic exposed the English Constitution as a chaotic mess of ancient tyrannies. Elevating one man to absolute power simply because he was born into the right family made no logical sense. Paine pointed out that mankind was originally created equal. To set up one specific family in perpetual preference to all others violates every natural and religious law. He observed that nature itself frequently turns hereditary succession into a joke. The system is so flawed that it regularly hands the crown to a fool, giving mankind, as Paine wrote, an ass for a lion. By separating the mechanics of government from divine right, Paine stripped the monarchy of its mystique. He traced the origins of kings not to heaven, but to the principal ruffian of some restless gang who forced others to pay for their safety. Next, Paine targeted the emotional argument holding the colonists back, the idea that England was their mother country. He argued that if Britain really was a parent, she was acting like a monster. Even brutes do not devour their young. The phrase mother country was a narrow piece of propaganda. America's true parent was Europe. This new world had become an asylum for people fleeing tyranny from every part of the continent, not just England. This map illustrates the physical reality of the colonial relationship. Paine pointed out the absurdity of supposing a massive continent is meant to be perpetually governed by a small island thousands of miles away. He framed it as a scientific impossibility. In no instance has nature ever made the satellite larger than its primary planet. By trying to force America to orbit England, Britain was reversing the common order of nature. Beyond the geography, the connection was actively destroying colonial economies. Being tied to Great Britain forced America to act as a makeweight in European politics, dragging the colonies into wars with nations that would otherwise seek their trade. The geographic, demographic, and economic facts all pointed to the exact same conclusion. England belonged to Europe, and America belonged to itself. Even if independence made sense logically, the colonists were terrified they lacked the military or financial strength to survive alone. Paine answered this panic with pure mathematics. Great Britain was suffocating under a massive national debt of over £140 million sterling. America, meanwhile, was starting with zero debt and sat on an entire continent of untapped resources. Specifically, America had vast supplies of timber, iron, and tar. Paine calculated that the colonies could build a naval fleet to rival anything in the world for a fraction of what England owed, simply by utilizing the raw materials they already had on hand. To organize this effort, he proposed a continental charter, a unified legal framework to secure freedom, property, and the free exercise of religion. And he insisted this constitution had to be written immediately. The window of opportunity was closing. If they waited another 50 years, the colony's populations and commercial interests would grow so large and complex that they would become impossibly divided. Colony would turn against colony. Paine reframed independence. It was no longer a distant dream to be handled by future generations. The shared trauma of the current conflict made it a fleeting necessity that had to be seized right now. In the winter of 1776, common sense spread rapidly across the colonies, passing from hand to hand and reaching readers in every class of society. The political elite were deeply divided. John Adams dreaded the pamphlet's massive populist appeal and vowed to counteract it. Meanwhile, military leaders like General Charles Lee confessed they were entirely convinced by its arguments. The pamphlet changed the stakes of the revolution. Instead of negotiating with the crown, the colonies began fighting for total independence. Paine achieved this by ignoring the exclusive, elevated language of the educated class. He delivered hard-hitting political theory in a voice that everyday people could actually understand and weaponize. Meaningful political change rarely requires overly complicated theories. Often, the most powerful thing you can do is strip away layers of long-held tradition, look closely at the mechanics of the system, and point out that it simply defies common sense.